Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have U.S. citizen with real ID handcuffed and held in immigration raid before being released from NBCNews.com, and that was posted by LegioX. And yeah, I thought real ID was supposed to be a secure national ID that and stuff like this wouldn't happen anymore. But that just goes to show you how, the government can say stuff like that, but they can still get you for whatever reason they feel like, since they have monopoly on legal use of force. Also, I'm pretty much against all the national government databases, but sadly I do have real ID, since they won't let you fly without real ID these days, even if it doesn't really matter, though, since they already have so many other databases at this point, like Social Security or the Census, so I personally don't really care for any national databases, but if they want to have another one, ultimately they can justify whatever they justify, since they have the monopoly on the legal use of force. Then we have, from $36 trillion to $56 trillion, Republican congressman warns of massive debt surge, and that was posted by CH4Locks. And that's a cross post from the economic subreddit. And that is it looks like a clip from CNN. Trump agenda bill hits conservative rollback in the House. And that was a rep, Keith Self speaking on the issue. And yeah, personally, it just goes to show you that it doesn't matter which branch of the uniparty is in power, the national debt's going to go up regardless. And the Republicans usually like to market themselves as the fiscal conservative party, but they just like to spend almost as much as the Dems do, even if they might market themselves as being the opposite. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have FDA plans to limit COVID shots to those over 65 or with high-risk conditions from abcnews.go.com, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan. And yeah, personally, I think, if the government wants to justify paying for people's COVID shots, they should be able to. If they don't pay for any, that's what they were doing during the Biden administration. But now, I think all but even the most devout of Covidians would agree that we've passed pretty much the height of COVID, and it's pretty much over at this point. And yeah, if the government wants to just only pay for COVID shots to those over 65 or with high-risk conditions, I think they should be able to, or just recommend it as well. Ultimately, I think, the government shouldn't be paying for any medical things, vaccines or otherwise. I think the government should be out of healthcare entirely, just like with a lot of other stuff like education, labor, commerce, etc., etc. But, the government will justify pay for what it justifies to pay for. So I personally would agree that, it should limit paying for COVID shots to only those who are over 65 or with high-risk conditions, even if, Reddit might think that's literally fascism. Because, Reddit thinks everyone should get free healthcare, or even though, Reddit's like, how could they justify for slavery for so long? But then they also go, where's my free education? Where's my free healthcare? Where's my free, etc., etc.? And that just goes to show you how, they're hypocritical when it comes to free stuff, because nothing in life is free. Cage the Elephant had a good song about that, there's nothing in this world for free, and that just goes to show, and yeah, so that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have when civil rights law becomes a weapon from Lemon Limelight, and they said from the Pacific Legal Foundation, when civil rights law becomes a weapon, Aaron Steed runs Meathead Movers, a California moving company for twist. Employees jog when not carrying boxes. The company welcomes applicants of all ages, but like most physically demanding jobs in the moving industry overall, it naturally draws younger workers. Many of its employees are students. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is a federal offense. The EEOC is now demanding $15 million, not because Steed or Meathead Movers turned older applicants away based on their age, and not because anyone claims to have been mistreated. Instead, the EEOC believes the company's branding could have dissuaded people over 40 from applying. It points to the fact that the company's workforce skews young, with no evidence of discriminatory intent and no actual victims. The EEOC has pursued Meathead Movers for 10 years, threatening millions of dollars in fines based on statistical disparities alone. Under disparate impact theory, businesses aren't judged by whether they treat people equally, they're judged by whether their outcomes are much a bureaucratic ideal. The problem is there are disparities in almost every industry, since every industry reflects the realities of its labor pool. Construction firms, tech companies, fashion brands, and security agencies attract different mixes of individuals. That's not discrimination, that's life. turning natural variation into de facto evidence of discrimination turns the free choices of individuals into legal liability. The irony is, by penalizing businesses for innocent imbalances, disparate impact theory encourages those businesses to discriminate intentionally, hiring by quota to protect themselves from liability. Civil rights laws were meant to stop discrimination. Disparate impact theory demands it, presenting equal protection concerns of its own. And they added, it's worth emphasizing that no individual ever made any discrimination claim against meat movers. The EEOC itself started the investigation, a rare event according to local reporting, which the EEOC has filed only 8 lawsuits based on its own initiated investigations for the last 10 years across all statutes and all federal courts across the entire country. A trial starts 2026, and in the meantime, Steve and so use social media to grab the attention of the current administration. I really hope that there is something in the new administration in the White House and the EEOC that's willing to just take a fresh look at our case and help us find some sort of resolve. And that's a smart move because the Trump administration openly disdains and vows to eliminate disparate impact theory, the legal theory underpinning the case, which uses statistical discrepancies rather than any discriminatory treatment to claim illegal discrimination. Besides, jobs ads with jogging employees are ageist. This ridiculous theory also says physical fitness tests are sexist and written exams are racist. Good riddance if disparate impact theory really goes away. And I would agree with all that. I think some jobs are going to attract a different client base than others. It's like I don't know why, if the EOC has a problem with this, I don't know why they're not suing Hooters for usually hiring young buxom women rather than elderly people. But it just goes to show you how the government loves finding problems where there aren't any. No one complained about this meathead movers company, but the government went after it anyway, and that just goes to show you how people just always need to have some sort of problem in their life, that even if there is no problem. And yeah, personally, I think, civil rights as a whole shouldn't be enforced by the government. People should have freedom of association. If Lester Maddox wants to not serve black people at his restaurant, I think that's racist, and I hope he fails, but he has every right to do so. And if this subreddit, they've had me banned for 100 episodes now, if they want to do that, I think they have every right to do so. I think they're hypocritical for doing so, especially since they brand themselves as uncensored when they clearly aren't. But, they have every right to do so. And yeah, that's why, I personally think the government should be out of all rights entirely. Our rights don't come from the government. They're innate. They come from within. And yeah, the government shouldn't be enforcing civil rights. People should be able to hire whoever they want to hire. And if it's a job like meathead movers or Hooters that naturally attracts younger people, I don't think the government should be suing them for age discrimination like they are in this instance. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Michael Moynihan. Well, why do you not take refugees from other places? And why are you doing this for white South Africans and white South Africans only, and shutting it down for, maybe Syrians or Iraqis or Afghans, from posted by B. Hart Hari, and that's crosspost from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for any government-sponsored refugee program. I think refugees should be coming here on their own naturally rather than with government assistance. The government should be helping people come over even if they are being oppressed. But with that being said, I do think it's interesting how the progressive left, who's like, oh, we need all immigrants, suddenly hates immigrants because they have the wrong skin color. The progressives only seem to like immigrants when they have dark skin. Well, the conservatives seem to like only immigrants when they have lighter skin. Ultimately the government would justify if they want to deport people of who they think have the wrong skin color while importing those who they think have the right skin color. I personally don't care for deportations or importations as a whole. I don't think that's government business. I think it's each individual should decide where they want to go with their own 2 feet, or if they have that. Maybe not everyone can move that way, maybe, but people should be justifying where they want to go, not the government telling them where they can and can't go. So yeah, I personally don't care for any refugee programs, but if the government wants to import white refugees, that's on them. I don't really care for any refugee imports regardless of the color of the skin of the refugees, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Jussie Smollett to pay $50,000 to charity to settle lawsuit filed by City of Chicago from CBSNews.com, posted by Color Monochrome. And yeah, I don't really care for Jussie Smollett. I think he's one of the race grifters you see today. He said, oh, I was attacked by 2 MAGA people, but they were actually 2 Nigerian Americans. blacks who he paid to attack him, and he wanted to stage it as a hate crime. And yeah, that just goes to show you how, it's just stuff like race grifting like that. And now you're seeing increasingly white race grifting as well. If that woman in Rochester, Minnesota, who called a child on the playground the N word, and then she went to give Send Go to grift on that. And yeah, I'm personally tired of all this race grifting, but everything's really just a grift these days, it seems, and it's just kind of getting tiring after all a while. I thought race relations would get better after the U.S. had elected a black president, but it seems like they only got worse. And I would blame Obama a lot for all this race grifting as well. He really started it with, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, and that's all this identity politics bullshit that the left used to be focused on. The left and the right used to be focused on class. In 2012, the left was like, we need to occupy Wall Street. The good, big business is ruining this country. Well, the right was like the Tea Party. They were like, we need to stop big government. They're ruling this country. And big business and big government usually tie at the hip. So that's why, they started pushing identity politics and Trump to divide them, in the culture war too, because they agreed on a lot. But now, no one can agree on anything because, everyone has all this race grifting or this transgender grifting, and it just all this woke circle jerk just gets annoying after so long. And yeah, if you wanna be a woke race or transgender grifter, or MAGA race or transgender grifter, you should be able to. But I'm just personally tired of it, especially since this whole circle jerk is going on for so long. Then we have Michael Monaghan. Why are you only caring about the white people in South Africa? There's a lot of woke right wing politics here. You're deporting a student at Columbia. Now you're taking in this person who has a social media history that's just like virulently racist. And that's from BRGari, and that's crosswords from the We the Fifth subreddit. And yeah, we already talked about the South African refugees. And yeah, I already kind of gave my 2 cents on that. So we'll just leave it at that. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Then we have Texas House bill passed, bill banning sale and possession of THC cannabis products from CBSNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, I personally don't think the government should be banning any materials whatsoever. I personally not really into all the cannabis stuff, but if people want to do that, that's on them. It's the same with any other harder drugs like your heroin, coke, or meth. I personally don't really get into that stuff, but if you don't get into that stuff and do that, it should be your body, your choice. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump announces full pardon for former Culpeper County Sheriff convicted of bribery from thehill.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's cross-post from the Virginia subreddit. And yeah, personally I don't care for how the government always tries to bail out its own, but look at Biden. He bailed out his son and Dr. Fauci, and Reddit said those were good things. So if the people will justify what they justify, if they want to bail out their own, that's usually what the government does. The government usually exists to benefit its own and go after its opposition, and that's true regardless of which branch of the uniparty is in the White House. Then we have Biden aide admits staff acted undemocratically because Trump was an existential threat to democracy, from dailymail.co.uk, and that's for a post from Bicolor Monochrome. And yeah, personally, it's interesting how a lot of the Democrats are very anti-democratic these days, but they say, oh, we're for democracy because it's in our name. And yeah, I don't really care for that rhetoric, but it's interesting how when Trump does something authoritarian, Reddit's always pouncing on it, saying this is the worst thing ever. But when Biden ever did something authoritarian, Reddit always justified it. And that's, as I always say in pretty much every episode these days, people don't have values these days when it comes to politics. They only have teams. For Reddit, the blue team's good, the red team's bad, and that's pretty much it. And for a lot of the more MAGA people, it's the other way around. And yeah, you gotta hold your party or to account, even if you don't always vote for them, that doesn't mean you still don't hold the ballot. Look at Thomas Massey. He's the guy who I think he's a Republican, but he's very principled, and I would say pretty much a libertarian, even if he doesn't have not a member of the Libertarian Party, because he's always trying to hold the Republicans to account for their big spending all that, and that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think let's see if there's even nothing new, so we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.